It's fantastic to be here to help run the session. Thanks very much for joining us. I'm joining from London, but I understand our panelists are relatively spread in both region, as well as, of course, the focuses of the organisations that they're involved in. My name is Rhys Spence. I'm Head of Research at Brighteye Ventures. Brighteye is an EdTech-focused fund, largely operating in Europe. We operate at pre-seed, seed, and Series A stages. Seed is our sweet spot, writing checks of $250,000 to 4 or 5 for the right company. We're incidentally, given the theme of today's session, publishing a new piece on the future of education content this Thursday. So watch this space for that. It features a nice market map focused on the evolution of EdTech content, and it may indeed include some of the companies that are featuring in the session. But that's quite enough for me and Brighteye. We're joined by some fantastic panelists today representing themselves and their companies that focus on a broad range of areas, as I've mentioned, at the forefront of their respective technologies. I won't tell you about the fantastic businesses and products they represent in anything but name, as I'd love for them to do that and have the opportunity to do that in a short moment. But in brief, I'm delighted to be able to chat with Bing Chen. Bing is CEO and co-founder of To Be Live, which exited stealth mode in Q2, very exciting times. And before this, Bing was VP of Product Management, Age of Learning, and held the same position at Blackbird, so a real EdTech product specialist. Also joined by Rachel Meisner. Rachel is Director of Education and Engagement at ActiveClass, an experienced practitioner, having been a history instructor for Colorado Community College System for 4 years. Next up is Arie Bittan. Is CEO at Mantis Vision, a leading developer of high quality and user-friendly 3D capturing technologies. And last but certainly not least, Chang. Ben is CEO and co-founder of Upduo, the data-driven sales enablement platform for frontline teams, providing training and practice. Prior to Upduo, Ben co-founded and successfully sold a company called Motif, a consumer video startup that launched and scaled to millions of users. The planned structure of today's session is that we'll start with short elevator pitches from panelists on the companies they're representing, hopefully focused on the problems they're solving, the vision for their field, and we'll then dive into some questions on judging product effectiveness, changing requirements on the demand side, the changing face of education content more broadly, and then, of course, the changing face of those slightly slower moving, arguably, institutions. Of course, we'd love your questions as we go, so please do add them to the chat. We'll all be keeping an eye out and come to them when we have around 10 to 15 minutes remaining. That's quite enough of the introductions now. So I'd love to start with short elevator to pitches, aiming for around 2 to 3 minutes, basically considering the products you're building, the problems you're solving, and it would be awesome to hear how you arrived at those problems and associated solution, and of course then more broadly a little bit more about your vision for the company and space you're in. So I'd love to start with Bing, and then we'll go to Rachel. Over to you, Bing.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Rhys. It's a pleasure to be here and pleasure to be one of the panel speakers at RTE2022. I started this journey many years ago in EdTech. So I've had the opportunity of working with school district and administrators in learning the challenges that are faced by educators and learners. But I want to fast forward to the summer of 2020 when the pandemic first started. My son failed his first year in high school. He failed math and English. And when I looked into it, it led to the problem of him not being engaged with the teachers online. And so at that time, I was working on an early childhood product called ABC Mouse at Age of Learning. And we were doing very, adaptive types of games and content, which was great for kids and great for people, learners. But then when I saw my son getting disengaged, it led me to want to do something else. And so we started To Be Live to help bring access and engage users online. And why I say access is because I also saw that there are billions and millions of educators out in the world who don't have the right access like we do in some parts of the world. We're fortunate enough to have the right equipment, the right bandwidth, the right content, and we can learn. And yet my son still failed too. um, so we built to be live to solve the problem of engagement. We built to be live to bring access to the community so that they can actually learn. And today what we've done is, over the past couple of years, just really dive into the technology, really dive into the use cases of what educators and learners need to accomplish when they go online. Yes, they've been able to learn in classroom for centuries, but now we're in the age where technology has enabled the reach to a lot of people around the world, and therefore we want to make sure that we can actually bring access and impact those individuals.
Fantastic, Bing. Thank you very much for kicking us off. And Rachel, I'd love to hear your equivalent perspective and story.
All right. So ActiveClass, I just joined ActiveClass this year, but ActiveClass was actually created by previous LMS engineers and employees that found gaps within learning management systems. And as an educator, I met our head of growth at ActiveClass at the Open Education Summit last year. And I started in K through 12 education. I've been a college instructor for 4 years, and I feel a lot of those pain points, right? Like my students online have to post in threaded discussion threads, and they hate them, and I hate them, and I hate grading them, and we're all unhappy. So I was looking for more innovative ways to engage my students, but noticed that students didn't have a lot of those skills that they need for college level courses. And they were engaging more in a social media type style. They wanted to share links more. So I had to shift my instruction, and I found ActiveClass. And what ActiveClass does is it's an LMS plugin. It's completely LMS agnostic. So we're in Canvas, Moodle, D2L, Blackboard, Genzabar. We can plug into any LMS. And what it does is it creates a social media-like learning environment for students. We also have DEI features that allow students to post anonymously, help students pronounce their names. Instructors can live conference within their LMS without students having to go from different tabs or different windows. So it really streamlines the learning experience for the student and the instructor. And as the instructor who saw those pain points, I was like, I need this in my classes. And so I do provide an educator voice for ActiveClass, and while still teaching, but our product really aims to serve the 21st century learner. So as we shift as educators from what I like to call content-based instructors to skills-based instructors, because that's what we should be teaching as meaningful skills, we need different ways and more meaningful and authentic ways to engage students, and ActiveClass helps do that within your online learning environment.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Rachel. What logical move and so satisfying to see solutions to your problems being so elegantly solved. I'd love to next get the perspectives of Ger, and then we'll head over to hear from Ben, if that's okay. So over to you, Ger.
Hello, pleasure being on the RTE 2022. I'm a founder and CEO of Mantis Vision, and we have started with something far from education. We have started by building dynamic 3D camera, 2005, which is quite old, I would say beyond the normal startup life. And we started by having a device that you could go around and model with a millimeter accuracy, usually industrials, and if it's inside of a car, if it is any kind of interior or exterior design. And 2016, we have decided that why not going all the way dynamically, which means instead of just capturing something statically while you're walking around to capture with, just a moment, Yael. So what we did, we basically put and synchronized multiple cameras sitting inside of this room. And if somebody can, Matthew, can you just share the screen? So here I am. This is me in 3D environment, but in order to see 3D environment, basically rotate and change perspectives. So what we did, we put multiple cameras in order to be able to represent anything live. It doesn't have to be a human or a skeleton. Anything that will be handling in my hands or will be in the environment would basically really 3D telepresent. And we find that to be something that is have the means with the right user interface to solve some of the video challenges. We see multiple screens. It's difficult to preserve eye contact. It is difficult to create engagement into something that you can actually present in 3D environment. And I think this is the first step of going that way. There are still many steps to move forward, but I think that's part of the discussion.
Fantastic, thank you very much, Ger. A real visionary setting out in 2005. So congrats on all the progress. And finally, but not least, of course, over to you, Ben.
Hey everyone, I'm Ben. I'm the founder and CEO of Upduo, and we build a learning and development platform for frontline and/or deskless workers. So these are doctors, nurses, people who work in physical locations and who don't have a computer at their desk every single day. We're mainly focused on the modality of learning rather than the content, or rather than on coaching. And we've designed a system that facilitates kind of peer-to-peer learning. So the story of this is we started in a high school math classroom, and we had my co-founder, Mike Mendelson, as a high school math teacher, had 30 students learning math on Khan Academy. And he realized after the first 30 days that he had 30 different hands in the air asking him 30 different questions. And he realized he was now the bottleneck to all their education. So he designed or built a Chrome plugin where instead of raising your hand, you would just hit this button. And this button would interface with the Khan Academy API and figure out which student in the classroom most recently mastered what you're struggling with. So if I'm struggling with the Pythagorean theorem, I hit a button and it connects me with Sally, two seats down from me, and she ends up teaching it to me. This was incredibly effective. It was so effective that he was able to convince his high school to host math class across grade levels, 150 students in a mathnasium. Hired a few TAs from a local college, college students just to make sure kids weren't killing each other, and it worked incredibly well. Now the issue with this system is that the top student has no one to learn from, and the bottom student has no one to teach. So they're not getting the full experience. Coming from the consumer world, I was looking at this classroom and I went, if we're able to scale this out to more and more people, there's always someone new who needs to learn something, and there's always someone who knows more than you. So the modality is peer-to-peer student-led learning, right? And when I say student-led, I actually do mean student-led, I guess in a different meaning of the word. And so it begged the question: how do we prove that this works everywhere? And so that's what Upduo is. It's a reimagining of that classroom where we built a mobile app for people who aren't necessarily in front of a computer every single day. It works for students of any sort. So we're big believers that in lifelong learning, and I think one of the really cool things that we've been able to design is how do we get the data that proves this works? Well, the retail sales floor is actually an incredibly interesting place because you have incredibly short kind of performance cycles, at least compared to students in K through 12. So we've been able to really tightly tie the sort of learning and development we're doing to very specific performance outcomes, and that's kind of our bread and butter today.
Thank you very much. Sorry, as well. So now to get into a few sort of meaty-ish questions. So most VCs and companies focus rightly to some extent on financial metrics as indicators of likely product effectiveness or quality. It can be difficult to decouple this sometimes from the effectiveness of your marketing or sales team. As companies operating at the forefront of your respective technologies and financial metrics aside, what kind of product effectiveness indicators are you considering, both in terms of product quality and I guess in terms of learning impact as well? And I suppose it'd be interesting to see how that then follows through into the key marketing points that you're communicating to your prospective customers. Feel free to take that more broadly if you'd like to, potentially along the lines of how you see EdTech or other high-tech solutions being leveraged to increase or elevate student or learner engagement, participation, and learning efficiency. So feel free to take it in either direction. But this time I'd love to start with Rachel, and then we'll head over to speak to Ben again, if that's okay. So over to you, Rachel.
Awesome. Well, I deal mostly with customer success and dealing directly with institutions, so this is a great one for me to start with. In terms of measuring or measurements, we use both quantitative and qualitative data. So in ActiveClass, we have two different learning environments. We have Active Feed, which is more of our, we call it the water cooler learning environment, then Active Assignments, which replaces discussion threads. And we actually do have quantitative data on how often students are logging in the class, how long they're staying in the course each day, how many posts they're making, how many upvotes, how many likes. We can aggregate all of that data for instructors as well as instructor engagement data. I'm a Quality Matters instructor, and a lot of us are judged, or not judged, but our performance rating is based off of how well we interact with students as well. So we do have a quantitative side of thing that we do report to instructors and institutions, but we also are working on collecting qualitative data. So we are asking our users about their experience. We're asking users to try to break our product and test accessibility to the limits. We're doing a full accessibility overhaul right now to make sure we meet every standard out there when it comes to auto captioning and text and fonts and color contrast and all that good stuff. We also ask our users halfway through each semester and at the end of every semester, how do you feel? What do you think that we can improve about the product? What would you like to see in the product? What can we add? So we're using that qualitative and quantitative feedback to continuously improve our product for educator needs in this space. Outside of that, we also conduct research for trends and innovations in education, like augmented reality, mixed reality, a lot of those things that are becoming more common in our learning spaces. So I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, it certainly does. It certainly does. I think, I mean, that was the reason I wanted to come to you first, actually, because I thought that to get the sort of practitioner's perspective on some of these things would be a really sort of helpful starting point from which to go over to Ben.
Yeah, I mean, our product pillars are human, effective, and fun. And a lot of this comes from kind of having built a consumer video company. And so on the effective side, yes, it is tied to financial metrics. But I think one of the cool parts about what we do is that when our learners learn, they sell more. So it becomes we get our cake and we get to eat it as well. And we've been able to show time and time again that our learners are generally performing about 20% higher than non-participants on our platform. But financial metrics aside, I think the human and fun piece is really interesting, and one of the great challenges of our era actually is how to make learning fun and engaging. And when I say engaging, I don't really mean like, oh, like they're doing this every single day. I mean like they want to engage with it, and your brain gets not just a dopamine hit from seeing something, but from helping someone else. So there's a lot where we're looking at when it comes to analytics on the human and fun piece. Amplitude is a great analytics platform for a lot of this stuff, and we've noticed that our users have been using our feedback boxes after our sessions to actually leave nice messages of gratitude towards their partners, and that's something in our product that we didn't realize they wanted to do. So right now we're spending a sprint actually developing the ability for our learners to leave messages of gratitude for one another. And the moment we started seeing that, we realized, we had an opportunity here to almost make people smile when they when they open the app and and get presented a message of gratitude from their partner yesterday. So right now that's really what we're focused on. And yes, it's a little bit amorphous, but I think the engagement metric there is how often are people leaving messages of gratitude for one another.
Well, that's interesting, and I think that's that aligns with what we think as well, because we're in the process of developing our approach to supporting portfolio companies on impact and therefore more broadly on effectiveness. And I think generally, we put it into the buckets of making things more affordable, more relevant, more efficient, more effective. But then I think in the enjoyment aspect is a really important part of it as well, because of course, it's not just said that learning should also be for pleasure, and that it should also be for the social element. So I think a lot of those points really resonate with the way that we're thinking about these things as well.
For sure.
Yeah, and so finally to head over to Ger for his perspectives.
Well, I think that the challenge is huge, and it's not just one technology that can handle it. And when hearing Rachel's platform, it sounds like something that needs to be integrated, because you do want to have the right engagement for people, which has been done through basically the rule of the game of your application. But it is possible to create more engaging, immersive environments that puts this into something that you talked about, AR, and so it basically doesn't have to be just graphical animations that somebody else pre-made, because I think if we're seeing what happens when Magic Leap came in and Microsoft with the HoloLens, everybody was showing education as showing the planetary, all the planets all around, all the surgery parts, and seeing the body structure from. It's clear that you have some ways to engage in real 3D environments to see things that you couldn't just get from a book or a flat screen video. But some of it was losing the engagement of the people. One of the things I've seen when I played a lot with VR is that I was trying to explain the person that has the VR inside how we should look at them and do that, and I was basically could not be engaged with him while he was experiencing that. And that's what we actually enable now, the ability to take that full telepresence, not of an avatar that is with some motion, but your real telepresence of whatever you do. You can handle the product or the thing that you want to be explaining, telepresent that into a shared space environment or by multiple people in the same space. And that opens up a lot of opportunities, both for real-time engagement, but also offline. We have Arizona State University have a system, and they have been using that to start capturing lectures, to be able to be taking and putting something in 3D space, and later on put all the visual things that instead of putting on PowerPoint, you can basically put the infotainment, informative information to be synced into the talk itself, all in 3D environment.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point on access, and I think that's certainly something that we'd like to explore later in the session in more detail, because it's such an important theme. And I suppose on a related note to this product effectiveness point and the bit that stands between us and that access question, you're clearly focused on a range of customer groups. We sometimes see companies evolving their customer focuses after investment, when they realize that it's easier to sell or scale when operating with particular groups over another. Perhaps the standard one is that it's hard to sell to schools sometimes, and therefore we see some companies pivoting to work with businesses. As companies designing solutions that alter the way that students or learners interact with content and their instructors, what are your reflections on the customer groups you're working with? Because I realise we span quite a few here, so it's quite interesting to get perspectives in each of those areas. And I suppose part two is, has anything surprised you in your attempts to work with these groups, and how ready do you think they are for the solutions that you're developing, which are, of course, really new models of doing things? And the part C, if I can, if they're not ready at the moment, what do you think stands between them and being ready? It'd be really interesting to get your perspectives on that. And I'd love to start with Ger this time, and then to call on Bing after that. So over to you, Ger. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Okay, that's a challenging question, because one of the problems we have as building up this kind of new technology is a good friend of mine saying sometimes it's not cutting edge, it's bleeding edge. It is difficult to engage with something that's in some ways waiting for the right device to be played back. Because I believe that the moment everybody would have, I would say, my guess would be Apple Glass is on, and they get used to it, then there won't be any big questions why it's needed. It's clear that you have a device that's how you experience life, either in VR or AR. And on that point, you would want to have adequate content to engage with. And so we are now working with those who are in some ways early adopters, universities that find that to be either innovative enough, or basically doing research in that field. We have Temple University in Finland, who use that under the CIVIT, which is the digital, human, and immersive connections of remote environments. So these kind of things are basically being used to build both the ability to create lectures in 3D that you will be building up the entertainment on top. But I would say still in early, I'm quite sure that most of my colleagues here having much more active users in the Go. So I would say I don't have the same metrics you would have into something that is already in the mass market, but we are really into the early steps of getting into immersive environments and telepresent. And I do believe that the big boom would be with the emergence of Apple glasses coming up for everybody.
Interesting. And I suppose, yeah, you're in the kind of challenging position of being so leading edge that you're preempting the direction of some of these huge players. But it's great to hear that you're finding some success with universities and with companies that recognize that this is the direction that we're heading in. So I think it's a really interesting a few years, I'm sure, ahead for you guys. And Bing, what's your perspective on this?
So, Bing, sorry.
Yeah, so with To Be Live, right? So To Be Live is a B2B platform, and we came into the market to help institutions and organizations connect with their users. And when I say connect, is prior to the pandemic, they all teach in person, but then during the pandemic, they had to all pivot and go online. And a lot of them were using tools, just off the shelf, whatever you can name it. The web conferencing tools, the webinar tools, the meeting tools out there, FaceTime, WhatsApp, Zoom, etc. And what they realized was it is very difficult to engage. So what we built over on To Be Live was all the engagement tools to allow the speaker, which is the host, and the participant to really connect. And not just connect in the video sense, because everybody can do video, and we're leveraging the superior quality of real-time streaming video for our platform. But we also layer on top of it all these different abilities for the learner and the educator, or the host and the participant, the speaker and the attendees to interact with each other. So we made everything a whiteboard, because that's one of the things we believe people need to do when they're engaging, is they need to interact and sort of touch each other's content and materials and interact with it. And so when we approach the schools, you're absolutely right, Rhys. It is very difficult to sell into schools, simply because there's a pedagogical change in the way teachers were taught to teach in the classroom. And Rachel, I think you have a lot of experience in this. Is in the classroom, you could see everybody. You know exactly what each student is doing, whether they're paying attention or not. But online, it's extremely difficult. So therefore, we had to build, analysis tools that capture attendance in real time, so that we do know whether a student is paying attention to the screen or not paying attention to the screen. If they're watching something else on a different tab or a different window or a different app on their mobile device, right? And so when we first sold to schools, they were like, "This is great. I like it. I'm using, my Google Meets because we have a Google account. I'm using Microsoft Teams because we already have that. So therefore, since the teachers are using it, I'm not, we're not ready to switch yet because we think the pandemic is going to end next month. We think it's going to end in 2 months or 3 months, right? They're hoping that it won't never last. Unfortunately, it lasted, and it led to a lot of students falling behind, which is a learning gap issue that we're all dealing with, right? A lot of kids are at least a grade year behind, right? So what we learned was going to a school is extremely difficult. However, there are institutions out there. The 2% of the early adopter schools are our customers in the early phase where we're in stealth mode. We needed those customers to help us develop the product, to teach us what we're missing. And so over the course of the last 2 years, we've built in the engagement tools to allow for real-time interaction over video like this. We built in the quizzes and the polls and the gamification, and also some of the AR things. And I'm so excited with your technology, Gur, because I can't wait to see how that could be incorporated into 2B Live as well. So we built in AR maps just so that we can be, sort of the leading edge of this technology here. But at the same time, we realized that, hey, there's a lot of work that goes into building AR and the content associated with it. I mean, I'm a big fan of AR and VR as well. I think, the games out there have done a really good job at simulating that experience. But we're not quite there yet with education because we've got thousands of years of content that need to somehow be digitized and converted into that environment. It's extremely difficult, I mean, a big company is taking care of that. I won't be able to handle that. But what I can handle today is how do I take existing content, digitize in some ways, but make it interactive, right? So the gamification thing that you were talking about, Benjamin, or Ben, that's so important. I think the fun needs to come back into education, even in the classroom, right? Even in the classroom, but more so online, because now we can't even touch each other. We can interact on certain objects. So we therefore need to take those tools that people are using in the classroom, transform it for today in online environments, and then somehow give them access. So we try to sell in the schools. Obviously, it's hard because they think it's going to end. We then went into the private schools, and this is where we found a sweet spot for the first 6 months or so. And then from the private schools, they started using it because they are nimble. They were able to go online. They took what they did in the traditional classroom, had some teachers trained to just do online, 100%. You're just 100% online teacher, and you're teaching this time, this day, and so on. And that's great because those teachers love it too, because not all teachers like to teach online. Then what we learned along the way was the same schools have other needs to engage with other constituents within their community, such as parents. And so they're taking the same tools, which is 2B Live's online ability to engage with students, and then switch it over to engage with parents now. And all of a sudden, you have this fantastic parent engagement tool that saves parents a lot of time from having to drive from point A to point B just for a 15-minute parent-teacher conference. Or if a parent can make it to a school presentation, they can watch it online too. So all of a sudden, it has expanded the sort of the services that the institution can provide. And then over time, again, when people start using it, we also realize that the school have other needs, such as employee and staff training. How do you train the cook that's coming in to the school? How do you train the teachers coming in? How do you even interview the teachers? So they're taking our technology, which is this live communication video, with the ability to host content, with the ability to have training materials, learning materials on it, and applying it not just in the classroom, but now with parents, because you have to educate parents on how to, support their children and teachers, to now using it in the sort of employee upskilling development, skills development and training side of things. So we're very excited about this journey that our customers have led us to in developing TubeLive.
Fantastic, and such a pleasure to hear about the evolution of your ideas, and of course the broad relevance of what you're building to so many groups, which I'm sure is extremely exciting for you and everyone involved with TubeLive. It's interesting that you talk about the difficulty of getting, or the importance of getting trials with the groups you want to help. That's certainly something that we're interested in sort of facilitating more and more as a VC that, of course, does have relationships with school groups and with universities as well. And it's something I know that the EU European Commission is looking at quite closely as part of updates it's making to its digital education plan. And the final point, I guess, just because you were talking about parent education, that's a real big interest for the fund at the moment as well. So if anyone's viewing this and is building something interesting, do let us know. But it would be fantastic now to hear from Ben and Rachel on the same question, if that's okay. Starting with Ben, if that's all right.
Yeah, for sure. So we're primarily, our primary use case today is retail sales workers, but we did get our start in schools, and we did find it difficult to sell to schools as well. And at the same time, we had retailers come to us and say, hey, like we can use this, and I think it was incredibly interesting and it is incredibly interesting to be working with kind of $15 an hour workers versus, like the gorilla in our space is better up, and working with $15 an hour workers generally means we have lots and lots of users. So, we out of the gate, like today we're doing 10,000 plus one-on-one training sessions every single week, and one of the challenges that we found with our customers, at least the L&D folk at these large companies, has been that primarily they've been doing episodic training for forever. So this month we're focusing on this, and it's always a webinar or deploying out a video through an LMS that they're spending lots of money on. And as a former engineer, one of the things that really appeals to me is CI/CD, or continuous integration, continuous deployment. And so we've designed a system that facilitates continuous learning. And one of the things we do for our customers is we figure out who knows what, and we maintain a fairly accurate model of 100 skills that you may need to know as a retail sales rep, and we correlate those skills with your performance metrics and also participation on our platform. So we figure out who needs to learn what next and what the best pairings are as well. And it's continuous. So this requires almost a paradigm shift in terms for the L&D folk, in that they should no longer be worrying about who's getting which trainings. They should be worrying about content and improving the content, because we don't do content at all. And so that's been a challenge in just teaching our customers to kind of let go of the reins a little bit, and let our software tell them or automatically assign trainings to who needs it. I'll pause there and pass it over to Rachel.
Fantastic, thank you, Ben. Really, really interesting insights, and I'd love to move on with Rachel, if that's okay.
Yeah, so ActiveClass is a little over a year old, and what the company was finding is that, again, like everyone has reiterated, it's hard to get in with the powers that be in educational institutions. I used to be a purchaser for K through 12, and it's a challenge. So what we did is we actually shifted our perspective, because we were trying to get into institutions and get pilots done. And a lot of them were like, I don't know, maybe next semester we'll think about it. Let's write an RFP. And we're like, okay, we're willing to engage you in that process. But as an instructor, I was like, we have a lot of pull, even adjuncts. So my pain points, I know, are my colleagues' pain points. And if we complain enough, or if we find something that we like enough, it will go up to our department chair, go up to our deans, and they will find the money, because we miss our students. I know I love integrating technology into my courses, so I'm okay with teaching online, but I do miss or I did miss authentically engaging with my students. So this is something that as soon as we show to instructors, they're like, yeah, this is super easy. Why do I not have this in my class, right? So we've changed our perspective to actually start discussing pilots and case studies and tests with individual instructors at different institutions so they can see the product. And what we ask them to do is maybe use ActiveClass in one course that they're teaching online and then not in another, so they can have a comparative look at how students are authentically or not authentically engaging in classes, and then getting that qualitative and quantitative data from them. And then they have that power and that data to go talk to their department chair, their dean, get us in with the powers that be, the decision makers, get us in with their e-learning departments. And that's how we've been doing it. So instead of going from top to bottom, we've really been trying to do more like of a grassroots instructor-led movement for the integration of Edtech.
Nice. Yeah, that makes total sense. And encouraging them to conduct a bit of trial sounds like a really smart way of doing things, especially if you have one or two particularly passionate and pro advocates within the school. That's certainly something that we've seen in products that are selling to universities, where one or two people start to adopt it, and of course then you start to shift perspectives in that institution. I'm sorry if I was just muted for part of that, but hopefully you can now hear me again. The session focuses on the frontiers of EdTech and unlearning. Frontiers are, of course, relative, depending on where you're based and your context. Let's speak a little bit about this accessibility issue. What are your takes on best practice for improving the accessibility of solutions that you're building within the various types of education that we're covered here in the panelists? What are kind of the key pain points or challenges that we need to address in that area? I'd love to start with Ben and then to go to Gur, if that's okay. And also a quick reminder before Ben gets started, that if you'd love to have a question shared, then please do put that in the chat. But there you go. I'll pause and hand over to you, Ben.
Actually, let me think about this one a little bit more.
Okay. Should we go with you, Gur, or?
Yes. Can you just remind me the questions again? I'm sorry, I was a bit picked up.
Yeah, sure. So we're talking about the accessibility issue and about the importance of broadening access to these new technologies, and the fact that frontiers are all relative. And for some people, the frontier means getting sort of basic device access, and therefore access to the earliest forms of content that's being digitized, and for other groups, of course, that can be it can be VR headsets in the classroom. I'd be interested in your thoughts on the accessibility issue and what you think can be done to improve access to some of these leading technologies, whether that's perhaps sort of government support, whether that's private sector support, public-private partnerships, those kind of things. I'd love to get your take on that, and I think your take would be very interesting as well, as a company that is at that leading edge.
So first of all, I think you have many challenges. It starts with bandwidth, then devices, and if I have to start with devices, which is the big thing, in some ways, having a volumetric 3D is similar to have a video camera invented before you have a video monitor. You could see group of pictures one by one, but it's not. There's no immersive, easy way if you're not putting yourself into VR, which is currently yet into the early adopters. It's not something that everybody else is using on a day-to-day life, and is not used to be engaged with that for a long time. So usually when you're going into 3D, you're either seeing that into a virtual space, as we've shown here, which is the same as you do in a video game, what we call the metaverse, or the engagement should be in AR or VR, which is that's why we publish basically this link. If I'm sharing this link, anybody could join on the web, on your mobile phone can see this in AR and put me on the room and anybody who else is discussing into his own living room or on the desk. So the accessibility has been given that as a web link to everybody on their mobile phone. But I wouldn't say that that would be the perfect way to engage. The perfect way to engage would be when you have glasses on and enjoy that. And as part of that, with all the respect to all government funding and all planning that can be done from the government, it usually comes from the consumer. And it usually comes from market leaders like Apple that suddenly, when they release it, everybody follow, and that becomes something that is massive enough. And I have great belief that's what the world will be coming on. So in terms of devices, I have no doubt that it should be coming up by the big players and make that a daily accessible device. As before Apple Watch, I never had. I stopped putting a watch on my wrist. At a certain point, you got to engage with that, and it becomes something that you say, okay, it has a value that I would fit with it, but it wouldn't be coming up from any big government decision discussion. The second problem is challenge, I would say, is bandwidth. We are all running now reasonably good video interaction here because I think that something has happened to the COVID days, and the things that we were trying to do 3 years ago and had a lot of flags and jitter and others are working better today. And for doing that very well in 3D, you need about 20 megabits per second per full body capture, full body participant, or 2.5 or 3 megabits per second for somebody using his phone. That's one of the things we did. We used the phones, the iPhones, that has both the front step camera and the world face camera to be joining as well. So if I can just try and ask a colleague to join in, and he will be joined up with his phone, and you'll be sharing that discussion to anybody that will have a link and will see it in AR. I wasn't intending to do this demo here on the panel because it will take too much of other people's time, but that's what is engaged, what I'm to be doing in 2 or 3 hours from now on the next panel, on the next discussion demo. So that will be where I'll be demonstrating all of that. So challenges have to be in devices. Second challenges has to go into bandwidth. And I think the major challenge is not about that. The major one is actually connecting what all of my colleagues are doing into one perfect example of a user experience. Because technology by itself is, as we said before, you can do a lot of stuff, but they need to create the right content. And that becomes a challenge. So yes, we have to build something that works together fluently. Because the technology is not going to be solving everything. It still needs to be something that is engaging, and that's some of the things my colleagues here are doing are really something I was thinking how I can integrate together. So maybe we'll do a follow up after the call.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really interesting perspective. And I think when we were putting together the future content report that that I mentioned at the start, we were speaking to a number of companies that operate in VR and AR, and they were talking about the pressure they're under, but commercially to a point, just whilst they're waiting for rollout of the hardware, to actually make their products available on 2D screens, and some are sort of more willing to compromise than others. And I think it's quite an interesting dilemma, I think, because obviously seeing it via a screen it's nowhere near as it's clearly not immersive, and I suppose in a way, so it's never the way that the content's meant to be presented. So it's a very interesting chicken and egg situation in some regards there. Rachel, I'll head to you next, and then I'll head to Bing afterwards, if that's okay.
All right. So in education, we do have to separate the two. So access and accessibility are completely different things, right? So when we're talking about access, we're talking about access to internet, access to technology tools, and not only access to internet, but access to stable internet. You can give someone crappy internet and they're not going to be able to work on it, right? So And those are larger issues, of course, in just in general, and especially in the education space that unfortunately ActiveClass cannot solve on its own. But we know that those access issues are out there. At ActiveClass, what we do since we embed in the LMS is we actually can be on any device, any mobile device, as long as the student or the instructor can access the LMS, then we can be accessed. Now, in terms of accessibility, that's what we address once we're in the class, right? So now you have internet, now you have a device. Can you read or can you hear from a screen reader? Will my course read? Can you see the color contrast? Do my videos have auto captions? All that kind of stuff. So when we're really trying to overcome these challenges, we have to separate access and accessibility, but think of them as two sections on a roadmap. So first, we need to provide equity through access, but then we need to provide equity through accessibility best practices as well. So right now we have some conferencing. We do conferencing tool integration, which does a lot of auto captioning, but we also have our own video and audio recording software that's within the LMS, within Active Feed and Active Assignments. That's where our accessibility overhaul is coming. We're working on auto captioning those with a high accuracy percentage, making sure that color contrast. I'm a professor or an instructor who's guilty of it. Like I would make like every other word a different color, like welcome to week 5. And for my colorblind students, that's not accessible, right? So we're working on building an HTML features that encourage accessibility and make it easier for instructors to post and for their courses to be accessible for all students.
It's a great comment on the difference between access and accessibility. So thank you very much for highlighting the point. And Bing, I know that Gert mentioned bandwidth, and I know this is something that is a key aspect of your work on access. So over to you for your perspectives, and then to Ben.
Yeah. Yes, that's right. That's right. We think about bandwidth a lot. Surprisingly enough, right? I live in Los Angeles, and I have bandwidth issues. When my son was on school, my son, my daughter, my wife, everyone's on the internet. We're trying to do these meetings, Zoom meetings, and Teams meetings, and so on. Our bandwidth would suffer, and we won't be able to connect. So, can you imagine some other places around the world? So, Rachel, you're absolutely right. Separating the two is important, and I commend you on making things accessible. That is extremely, extremely difficult, and you're taking it head on here. Now, on the access part, what we did at To Be Live was we constantly try to optimize for low bandwidth environments. So much so that today we can run To Be Live over 3G, over a cell phone hotspot, which consumes less than half of what other similar video type products consume. And that's because we know that there are a lot of people out there with lower end Android devices with paid per gigabyte or megabyte internet. They don't have all the bandwidth to buy and spend. And so what we did was we optimized the video, but we also came up with our own low bandwidth streaming of videos on our own. So when you host content, when you do desktop sharing, for example, it's consuming a lot of bandwidth. Not only are you streaming your video from whatever source you have, you're also going through the video provider to then restream whatever you're streaming out from your computer to their devices as well. So there's a lot of bandwidth being consumed there. But on our end, what we do is we allow our sort of educators, our institution and companies to host content on our service, and then just leverage a CDN to actually optimize the delivery to whatever end mile the user is located at, and to test it out, right? To test it out, well, what we did was we actually my co-founders are Brazilians, so they tell me Brazil has very bad bandwidth in a lot of different places. We got to make it work, and one of the things the first test they did was they went deep into the Amazon jungles, where they were able to get some cell phone connection, and they were able to run To Be Live there, to have somebody teach a village, students in a village using To Be Live. So that worked, and we were pretty happy about that. Then the second test we did was I partnered with the Ministry of Education in Gambia, Western Africa, to test this out as well. And we actually tested in 3 different environments: the urban areas, the suburban, and then the rural areas, the remote villages, who today they have internet connectivity. 5 years ago, forget about it, but today they do have that. It may not be high-speed 4G LTE, but they do have 3G, 4G connectivity. And because we're able to use to be live on any web browser, any tablet running a browser as well, or a mobile app, we're able to use it on lower end devices that they have there, or just more basic, newer devices. Let's put it that way. They're not going out there buying 5-year-old machines. They're going out there buying $100 Chromebooks, and it runs beautifully on a Chromebook. But one thing we learned, which is very interesting to me, was because they have smart screen TVs, and smart screen TVs, the 50-inch, it's like $300, $200 or something like that, really, really cheap. And those smart screen TVs come with a browser. We learned that instead of connecting to a computer, they're just connecting to a TV now. And they're just watching TV. So they're watching to be live coming in, stream in, and learning from the teacher, like watching TV, which I thought was very interesting, because now we just remove yet another piece of equipment to a standard TV monitor, which they say, hey, we'll buy TV all day long, because TVs can be used for any other things besides watching. It's used for watching content. So anyways, so one thing we learned over here is, make the bandwidth consumption as low as we can without degrading the quality. So we check that box. The next thing over here is, how can we stream it or somehow show it on different devices? And in this case, we found out that smart TVs are actually very capable. A mouse, USB mouse, and now you can actually control content on it as well. You can now start to interact with it. And the nice thing with the TVs is, for these poorer communities, they only need one TV and they can serve a whole classroom of 50 students all watching at the same time. And the content and the interaction between the teacher and the students can now, happen with just a simple webcam up there.
Awesome. And I think Ben, if it's okay, I'd love to tie in your response to a final quick question to the panel, if that's all right.
Sure. Yeah.
Awesome. So we have only a very short period of time left. So I think we only have time for about 30 seconds per person at most. So I'm going to try and be very quick as well and run through this. So our view, in very brief terms, of how education and content, how it's received, has changed, is that we first had a phase where we digitized existing analog stuff. That's where Coursera, Udemy, etc. are there. You then have a second phase where you move towards community alongside those modular content pieces, which kind of doubles as where we find boot camps. Then you have the evolution of more personalized elements that include application of AI. And beyond this, you start to have kind of the immersive elements, which includes the AR, the VR, etc. The question is, what are your thoughts on this evolution? And I suppose where are we heading in 30 seconds? And I'll start with Ben, and then go to Rachel. And again, as I say, 30 seconds, please, if that's okay.
Yes, for sure. Like I said at the beginning, we're focused on the modality of learning, and I think for ages we've there are decades of pedagogy that have been that research has peer reviewed as well, and we aren't yet doing that. So I think there's a really big diff between what science tells us works and what we're currently doing everywhere. I think that there's just a gigantic gap here, and I'll try to keep it short. So pass.
Awesome. I absolutely agree on focusing on what works. Absolutely. And now over to Rachel, if that's okay, and then we'll go to Ding afterwards.
All right, yeah, I absolutely love VR and AR as a history instructor. I'm falling in love with like virtual museum tours, but I look forward to the future of AR and MR, where my students can actually be in the museum and interact with it and have it interact back with them, rather than just have a stagnant screen in front of them still. So I look forward to these innovative moves in education. And Gur, I applaud you for what your company's doing.
Awesome. Go 15 seconds, I'm afraid.
So I think we discussed most of it. I think the right way to be engaging, two people engaging in VR space, and sharing that with other. That's where you need to go. And still not there, mostly because of bandwidth, but everything else is basically possible.
Awesome. And we have just ticked over the 1 hour, and we definitely need to wrap up. But Bing, any 5-second thoughts from you to wrap us up?
I think we're at the cutting edge of the next versions of content, and the publishers that we have today, they're 1,000-year-old publishers, out there creating content. They don't have the right tools. I think we need to equip the publishers with the right set of tools to build in steps here a more engaging series of content to eventually become like what Rachel was saying, visit a museum and be able to touch and feel things.